Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I always believed the city would change my life. Growing up in a town where nothing ever really happened, I used to sit on my front porch and dream about neon lights, music thumping through the air, and a life that felt larger than the sky I stared into every night. Big cities were where dreams were made, where success was born, and I craved that rush. That's what I told myself when I packed my bags and caught a one-way bus to Westmont. I was 22, broke, and clinging to the hope that I'd finally become someone. My best friend Na had already made it there. She'd left our hometown a few years earlier, and from what I could tell, she was thriving. Her social media was a highlight reel of rooftop bars, velvet rope entrances, and selfies with people I'd only seen in music videos. She wasn't famous exactly, but she moved in circles where people knew her name. She had connections, charm, and a way of walking into VIP lounges like she owned them. When I told her I was finally moving to Westmont, she squealed over the phone, "We're going to own this city, just wait." For a while, it felt like we really might. Na seemed to know everyone. There wasn't a high-profile club she couldn't waltz into or a promoter she didn't have wrapped around her finger. She carried herself with a kind of confidence I envied, like she was born for this world, like she belonged. Me? I was slower to adapt. The club scene felt like some bizarre dream I kept waking up inside of. Flashing lights, pounding bass that rattled your chest, conversations with glossy-eyed strangers that blurred together between shots of overpriced liquor. It was intoxicating, sure, but surreal too. Like the glitter was covering something I didn't want to look at too closely. Something hollow. Still, I ignored that feeling. Until the night I couldn't. It started with a phone call late one afternoon. Na's voice buzzed with energy. "You are not going to believe this," she said, practically shouting. "We got invited to the party." I paused. "Which party?" "Landon King's." I nearly dropped my phone. Everyone in Westmont knew Landon King. He wasn't a celebrity in the traditional sense. He didn't act or sing, but his name was whispered in every upscale lounge and behind every velvet rope. A businessman, club owner, and if the rumors were true, the guy who quietly controlled half of Westmont's nightlife. His parties were legendary. No cover, no lines, no phones. Just pure exclusivity. You didn't get invited to a Landon King party. You were chosen. "How?" I asked, heart thudding. Na laughed, brushing it off. "Friend of a friend. Doesn't matter. What matters is, we're going." Something twisted in my stomach. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" She scoffed. "Are you kidding? This is the kind of party that changes everything. You think I'm going to say no to that?" I hesitated, but Na was relentless, like always. Eventually I caved. I should have listened to my gut. The house was buried deep in the hills, far from the chaotic hum of the city. We drove for what felt like forever until we reached a sleek modern mansion perched like a glass sculpture above the valley. Every line of it was too perfect, too cold. Blacked-out SUVs lined the curved driveway, their tinted windows giving away nothing. It was silent up there, like the wind had been muted. At the entrance, a man in a black suit stopped us. "No phones inside," he said, hand extended. I hesitated, gripping mine tighter. "Why?" "Privacy policy," he replied, unmoving. Na had already handed hers over without flinching. She nudged me. "Come on. It's normal for these kinds of things." I wasn't so sure, but I gave in. Inside, the air was thick with scent. Perfume, expensive cologne, something sharp and unplaceable. The living room stretched out into an open terrace that overlooked the city like a throne above the kingdom. The infinity pool shimmered with light from the skyline, glowing like liquid sapphire. Music played from somewhere unseen, a slow, pulsing rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat without permission. The place was full of beautiful people, models, influencers, actors I recognized from glossy magazine pages. They moved through the space like it belonged to them, laughing too loudly, sipping drinks that looked more like art than alcohol. And then there was Landon King. He didn't have to speak to draw attention. His presence commanded it. Tall, tailored, exuding that rare kind of charisma that felt dangerous in its quiet. His eyes scanned the room with complete ownership, and when they landed on me, just for a second, it felt like I'd stepped into something I didn't understand and couldn't escape. "Welcome," he said, flashing a calm, unnerving smile. "Tonight's a special night." I didn't know what he meant. Not then. At first, it just felt like another over-the-top party, the kind Na dragged me to almost every weekend. But an hour in, things started to feel wrong. I noticed the way some guests slipped behind closed doors and didn't come back. The way the staff, especially security, communicated without speaking, just subtle nods, tense glances. It was like everyone was waiting for something to begin, something unspoken. And when Landon spoke, the entire room seemed to shift, like his words carried weight none of us understood. Then I saw her. She was sitting alone by the pool, half lit by the reflections from the water. Her face was beautiful, eerily so. But something about her was off. Her makeup was smeared, like she'd been crying. Her dress clung to her body, slightly torn at the hem, like she'd been pulled or dragged. She stared into the water like she wasn't really there. "Nah," I said, tugging at her arm, but she just giggled, too drunk on champagne and adrenaline to care. I left her behind and slowly approached the woman. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She flinched at my voice. Her eyes snapped to mine, wide and frantic. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" She reached out suddenly and grabbed my wrist. Her fingers were ice cold. "Leave, now, before it starts." Before I could ask what she meant, a firm hand gripped my shoulder. "The host would like to speak with you," said one of Landon's security men, his tone polite but final. I turned back, heart thudding, but the woman was gone. I was led back inside. Na caught up with me, giddy and oblivious, and together we were escorted through a velvet-draped hallway into a private room. It was dimly lit, the walls lined with red velvet curtains that swallowed sound. In the center stood a long, dark wood table. Several guests were already seated, some familiar, others not. Their expressions were vacant, too calm. Landon stood at the head of the table, smiling. "Now that we're all here," he said, "let's begin." "Begin what?" A tall woman in a black dress stepped forward with a stack of papers. She began placing them in front of each guest. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "A contract," she replied smoothly. I looked to Na. She was already scribbling her signature, not even reading it. "Seriously?" I whispered. "It's just part of the fun," she said, eyes bright with anticipation. "Come on." I glanced down at mine. The legal language was thick, abstract, almost cryptic. But one sentence caught my eye. "By signing, you agree to full participation in tonight's experience. This agreement is binding in perpetuity." My skin went cold. "Nah," I began, barely able to get the words out. "I don't think this is—" "Just sign it," she said again. But this time there was a sharpness in her voice, like she didn't want me to ruin something. I stared at the pen in my hand, at the contract. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get up and leave. I dropped the pen on the table. "I think I'll pass," I said quietly. The room fell silent. Landon's smile twitched, just slightly. "Are you sure?" I nodded, throat dry, muscles coiled tight. "Shame," he said, voice still calm. But the warmth was gone. Before I could stand, two men were on me. Their hands locked around my arms like vices. I struggled, panic rising fast, but they didn't flinch. They dragged me down a corridor deeper into the house. The lights grew dimmer. The walls felt closer. We reached a door. It opened, And I saw it. A circular room lined with plush seats. Masked people lounged around the edges, watching silently. In the center, under a single spotlight, was Na. She was tied to a chair with silk restraints. Her dress was torn, her face terrified. Her eyes locked onto mine. "Please!" she screamed, but the music drowned it out. Landon stood beside her, calm and collected, like a master of ceremonies. He turned to me, his gaze cold and inescapable. "This is the game," he said softly, "and she's tonight's piñata." Before I could process what he meant, someone stepped forward from the crowd, masked, silent, and struck her. Na screamed, the sound choked by the pulsing music. I lunged forward, but the guards held me back. I screamed for them to stop, but no one listened. The crowd began to cheer. The lights flashed in sync with the beat. The music got louder. And the city I had once dreamed about, this beautiful, glittering city, finally showed me its true face. I don't remember how I escaped. I remember running, barefoot, my lungs burning. I remember the sound of Na's screams fading behind me. I remember flagging down a car on the winding hill road, my hands shaking as I begged for help. The police found nothing. No house, no masked people, no Na. She was never seen again. I tried to tell someone. I tried to scream the truth. But the threats came quickly. Phone calls in the middle of the night. Envelopes slipped under my door. Notes that said, "We saw you." I was being watched. I was being followed. So I stayed quiet. For years. Until now. Because someone has to know what happens behind those doors before someone else disappears. I should have never taken that pill. I never imagined my 19th birthday would end the way it did. It was supposed to be a night of fun, laughter, celebration, maybe a little chaos, a milestone marking the end of my teenage years. But instead, it became the night that would haunt me forever. It started off pretty normal. I'd just wrapped up a brutal week of classes, exhausted but buzzing with anticipation. My birthday landed on a Friday, which felt like the universe giving me a perfect excuse to go all out. The plan was simple: a few drinks, loud music, and if things went well, maybe even a little adventure. But I didn't expect Jason to bring pills. Not that night. Maybe I should explain who Jason is. We'd been best friends since we were kids, met in primary school, bonded over video games, and stuck together through every awkward phase of adolescence. He was the wild one, always chasing a thrill, daring the world to keep up. Me? I was the more grounded one. Not perfect by any means, but I had my limits, and I usually knew when to stop. Then there was Aaron. He was a year younger, but had been part of our group for as long as I could remember. Quiet, cautious, always overthinking every step. He looked up to us, especially Jason, though he'd never admit it. You could see it in the way he lingered on Jason's words, laughed at all his dumb jokes, tried to match his energy, but never quite pulled it off. That Friday morning, Jason found me at my locker. That crooked grin stretched across his face like he'd just won the lottery. "So, birthday boy," he said, slinging an arm around my shoulders. "Big night ahead or what?" I grinned back. "You already know. A few drinks, maybe hit a club if we can sneak in. Nothing too crazy." Jason shook his head, eyes gleaming. Nah, I got something better this time. Trust me, man. Tonight's gonna be unforgettable." I should have asked more questions right then, should have read between the lines. Jason never just meant alcohol when he said unforgettable. But I laughed, assuming he had a bottle of something stashed in his backpack. Maybe a fancy whiskey he'd stolen from his dad. If only it had been that simple. By the time night rolled around, I was hyped. We were finally legal. Well, almost. Old enough to fake it, young enough to get away with bad decisions. The kind of in-between age where consequences still felt like someone else's problem. Jason showed up first, dressed sharp, too sharp, like he was going to a movie premiere instead of a dingy club downtown. That grin was still there like a neon warning sign. Trouble incoming. Aaron arrived late, his usual fidgety self. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, pulling at the sleeves of his jacket. "Man, are you sure about this?" he asked, voice low, eyes darting toward the street. "We don't even have real IDs." Jason rolled his eyes, pulling out a sleek black wallet. "Relax. Got us covered. Fake IDs, grade A fakes. Just act confident. That's all it takes." Confidence was Jason's superpower. It didn't matter where we were or what we were doing. He carried himself like the world would move out of his way, and most of the time it did. The club was chaos when we got there. A neon-lit maze of bodies, bass so loud it felt like it rattled your ribs. The air was thick with perfume, sweat, and something vaguely chemical. We weaved through the crowd, brushing past dancers and flashing strobe lights. For a while, it was exactly what I'd hoped for. Shots of vodka, bad dancing, laughing till my sides hurt. I could feel the alcohol crawling through my veins, loosening every muscle, dulling every worry. Then Jason leaned in and tapped my shoulder. "All right, birthday boy," he said with that same damn grin. "Time for your real present." I followed him toward a corner booth, away from the crowd. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic bag filled with tiny white pills. He held it up like a magician revealing a trick. "Ecstasy," he said, voice low but buzzing with excitement. "The good stuff." My stomach dropped. I stared at the pills, my heart suddenly pounding in my ears. "I don't know, man," I said, my voice barely audible over the music. "I've never done anything like that." Jason laughed, clapping a hand on my back. "Dude, it's just a little something to make the night better. You trust me, right?" And that was the problem. I did. "You'll love it. It's your birthday. Live a little." Jason's voice cut through the music like a devil's whisper. He dropped the pill into my palm with a wink, then turned and handed one to Aaron. I looked over at him, hoping he'd say no, give me an excuse to back out too. But he just stood there, frozen, eyes flicking between us. "One pill," Jason said. "Just one. We'll all do it together." I should have refused. I should have turned around and walked out of that place. But peer pressure's a beast, and Jason had a way of making everything sound harmless, like a game. So I swallowed it. "Just one," I told myself. What could it really do? At first, nothing. Just the pounding bass in my chest and the sticky heat of 100 sweaty bodies pulsing under neon lights. I thought maybe I'd gotten a dud, but then it crept in. Warmth, slow and syrupy, unfurled through my limbs. My skin buzzed with sensation, each beat of the music syncing with my heartbeat. Lights flared like stars. Every touch, every glance, every breath seemed electrified. I turned to Jason, grinning like an idiot. "Woo!" I laughed, my voice echoing in my own ears. "Told you, man," Jason said, grinning back. "Just let it take you." But not everyone was floating. Aaron didn't look high. He looked terrified. His pupils were blown wide, his face pale and damp. He was swaying slightly, mouth opening like he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. I don't feel so good," he muttered. Jason laughed and threw an arm around him. "Relax, man, you're fine. Just enjoy it." For a while I did. The world was flawless, like a dream you didn't want to wake up from. I laughed, I danced, I felt completely free. Until Aaron collapsed. It happened in an instant. 1 second he was standing next to us, then he wasn't. His body hit the floor with a sickening thud, limbs jerking violently. "Aaron!" People screamed. The crowd backed away. Some just froze, staring like deer in headlights. I dropped to my knees beside him, panic seizing my chest. "Aaron! Aaron, wake up!" His eyes were rolling back. Foam bubbled at his lips. His whole body convulsed like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. Jason stood frozen, eyes wide, muttering, "Shit, shit, shit." I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it. "We need an ambulance," I screamed, but the music still thundered. No one turned it off. No one knew what to do. The rest was a blur. Chaos, lights, paramedics forcing their way through the crowd, people crying, phones out, whispers spreading like wildfire. By the time they got him out, Aaron wasn't moving. His skin was already cold. The waiting room at the hospital was suffocating, not quiet, dead. That kind of silence that presses on your lungs makes you feel like breathing is a crime. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Jason sat beside me, pale as a ghost, not saying a word. A doctor finally walked in, but I already knew. I could see it in his face before he even opened his mouth. "I'm sorry. We did everything we could." The words hit like a sledgehammer. I barely heard anything else after that. Then came the police. Interrogations, blood tests, questions that felt more like accusations. I found out later the pills were laced with something lethal. Jason was arrested. 5 years in prison. Me? I didn't walk away clean. I was charged, fined $5,000, slapped with 100 hours of community service. But none of that was the real punishment. The real punishment was Aaron's parents. They never spoke to me again. They didn't have to. The way they looked at me, it said everything. Their son was dead, and I'd helped kill him. My own parents were shattered. They tried to be supportive, but I could feel the distance growing every day, the disappointment, the heartbreak. I stopped partying, stopped drinking, stopped being me. Because no matter how many years pass, there's one thing I'll never forget. If I had just said no, Aaron would still be alive. That night ruined me, changed me, and I pray, God, I pray, no one else ever makes the same mistake. I never expected the night to spiral into chaos. It was supposed to be simple, a low-key birthday celebration, nothing extravagant. Just a few drinks, a little dancing, and the company of people I thought I could trust. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. I had decided to throw myself a birthday party at Black Echo, a grungy downtown nightclub. Not upscale or classy, just dim lights, sticky floors, flickering neon strobes, cheap drinks, and a DJ who actually knew how to read a room. I wasn't big on partying, especially after the rough few months I'd just crawled through, but I figured I deserved at least one night to let go. Just one night. I invited 4 people, not my closest friends, but people I felt comfortable enough around. There was Aiden, loud and magnetic, the kind of guy who could make friends with a lamppost. Jake was easygoing, always smiling, always down for anything. Ryan was more reserved, kind of kept to himself unless he'd had a few drinks, but when he loosened up, he could be a blast. And then there was Zoe. She was Aiden's girlfriend, not someone I knew too well, but she had this effortless charm that made her the center of every room, even if she wasn't trying. We met outside the club around 10 p.m. The line snaked down the block, but Aiden dapped up the bouncer like they were old buddies, and just like that, we were in. The place was alive, sweaty bodies moving under pulsing lights, the bass thumping through my shoes like a second heartbeat. The air was heavy with heat and liquor, the kind of atmosphere that makes everything feel just a little surreal. We claimed a booth in the back, half hidden in the shadows, and ordered the first round. Drinks flowed, music pounded. Laughter bubbled up between us, loosened by alcohol and the electric hum of a night that still felt full of promise. For the first hour, everything was perfect. Then the cracks started to show. I noticed Ryan stealing glances at Zoe. Subtle at first, just quick looks when he thought no one was watching. But I was watching, and I wasn't the only one. Jake caught it too. We both noticed the way Zoe leaned in closer when she laughed, how her hand lingered just a little too long on Ryan's arm. Aiden was oblivious, too busy downing shots like water, shouting over the music about how this was the best night ever. But Jake leaned toward me, murmuring under his breath, "Man, this is gonna get messy." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. Not our business. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole thing blew up. Aiden's happy blur started to shift the moment Zoe said she was going to the bar. Ryan got up to follow her, too quickly, too deliberately. Aiden squinted after them, frowning. "What's up with that?" he asked, his words slightly slurred, but the suspicion was there. Jake and I exchanged a glance but said nothing. The tension settled heavy between us. Then it happened. Aiden spotted them, Zoe and Ryan standing way too close near the bar. Her hand was on his chest. Their faces were barely inches apart, laughing, whispering. I could practically hear the snap in Aiden's mind as his face shifted. Confusion, then recognition, and finally something darker. His smile dropped, his jaw tightened. "Son of a bitch," he growled under his breath. He pushed through the crowd, not waiting for us, shoulders tense, fists clenched. Jake and I moved after him instinctively, not because we thought we could stop him, but because we didn't want to watch this unfold from a distance. Aiden reached Ryan first. He grabbed his shoulder and yanked him around. "What the hell, man?" Ryan looked stunned, his mouth opening like he was about to explain, but he didn't get the chance. Aiden's fist came down hard, slamming into his jaw. The crack of it echoed over the music. Ryan staggered backward, crashing into a bar stool and knocking it over. Zoe screamed. Heads turned. Music faltered for a second as the crowd parted like waves around them. "Relax, man," Ryan blurted out, holding his hands up, voice cracking with panic. "It's not what you think. Not what I think," Aiden barked, laughing bitterly. "You've been making eyes at her all damn night, and now you're all over her?" Zoe stepped in between them, both hands pressed to Aiden's chest, trying to calm him. "Babe, stop. It's nothing. Seriously." "Nothing?" Aiden's face contorted with rage. "Then tell me the truth, Zoe. Right now." She froze, eyes wide, lips parted, but said nothing. That split second of silence was all he needed. His jaw clenched, breath shaky. "Aiden," I started, but it was too late. He reached behind the bar, grabbed a half-empty bottle, and slammed it against the counter. The glass exploded in his hand, leaving jagged shards clutched in his fist. My stomach dropped. This was spiraling out of control. "Whoa, Aiden!" Jake shouted, stepping forward, arms out. "Chill the hell out, man!" The bouncers noticed the commotion and started pushing through the crowd, but Aiden wasn't listening to anyone. His eyes were wild, bloodshot, locked onto Ryan like a predator. Then he lunged. Ryan barely dodged the swipe of the broken bottle, stumbling backward into a cluster of dancers. The club exploded into chaos. Screams, drinks flying, tables crashing to the floor. People shoved past each other trying to get away. I tried to grab Aiden's arm, desperate to hold him back. "Aiden, stop!" He shoved me off hard enough to knock me sideways. He was beyond reasoning, shaking with fury. Then, out of nowhere, click. Everything stopped. That sound, the distinct chilling click of a gun's safety being disengaged, sucked all the air out of the room. The music cut off. The crowd froze like statues. I turned toward the sound and my blood went ice cold. Ryan had pulled a gun. "Back the fuck up," he growled, his voice hoarse and shaking. He was breathing hard, chest heaving, the weapon trembling in his grip. Aiden froze, staring down the barrel, eyes wide with disbelief. The broken bottle slipped from his fingers and shattered at his feet. "Are you insane?" Zoe whispered, tears welling in her eyes. She took a step toward Ryan but stopped herself, frozen by the fear on his face. Ryan's hands were trembling so badly the gun quivered in the air. His knuckles were white, like the life had drained out of him. He wasn't thinking, he was just reacting. People began backing away slowly. Some ducked behind tables, others fumbled for their phones, already recording. The club had gone eerily silent, just the sound of Ryan's heavy breathing and the distant wail of sirens growing louder. Then the front doors burst open. "Police, drop the weapon!" an officer shouted. Ryan turned, startled, and hesitated, just a second too long. Bang! The sound cracked like lightning through the silence. I flinched as Ryan collapsed to the floor, the gun spinning from his hand and clattering across the tiles. Zoe screamed and dropped beside him, sobbing hysterically, her hands hovering over his chest, unsure where to touch. Blood spread beneath him. People shrieked and scattered as police poured into the building. Officers rushed Aiden and tackled him to the ground. Jake and I raised our hands, staying perfectly still as we were ordered not to move. It was over in a matter of minutes. Outside, under the glow of red and blue lights, I stood in shock, barely feeling the night air. Ryan was still alive, barely, being loaded into an ambulance, his face pale and drenched in sweat. Aiden sat handcuffed on the curb, staring at nothing, his expression hollow. He looked like someone had ripped the world out from under him. Zoe was crouched near the paramedics, her face buried in her hands, mascara streaking down her cheeks as she sobbed uncontrollably. I just stood there, numb. My ears still rang from the gunshot. My chest felt heavy, like I couldn't take a full breath. I stared at the wet pavement and tried to make sense of it. I had thrown a party for my birthday. Now one friend was on his way to the hospital. Another was heading to jail. And the girl at the center of it all, she looked shattered, like something in her had snapped and wasn't ever going to heal. I exhaled, a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The weight of the night crushed me from the inside out. One thing I knew for sure, I was never throwing another damn party again. I still don't know what happened that night. I don't think I ever will. It was supposed to be just another night out, a celebration. My best friend Karen had finally proposed to his longtime girlfriend Mira, and to mark the occasion, a few of us planned a night out at an exclusive club on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't the kind of place you'd hit on a typical Saturday. This was one of those hush-hush, members-only spots where the music hit a little too hard, the drinks were stronger than they should be, and the crowd had that edge of money, secrets, and trouble. I remember the drive there, how the city lights faded behind us, giving way to long stretches of dark road, the kind where you start to question if you're still headed anywhere real. Neon signs got fewer, flickering out one by one, until there was just blackness and the low hum of tires against asphalt. The club was called Nocturne, and from the outside it looked like an old gutted warehouse, gray, faceless, and utterly forgettable. But once you stepped inside, it was like falling into another world. The air was thick with the scent of sweat and expensive cologne. Dim red lights pulsed along the ceiling, washing everything in a blood-warm glow. The bass throbbed so deeply it rattled through my chest, into my bones. There were 6 of us that night. Karen and Mira, my younger brother Rohan and his girlfriend Aisha, and me with my fiancée Sana. Rohan had volunteered to drive, and I remember him being in unusually high spirits, cracking jokes about how the night would probably end with someone crying in a parking lot. "I swear if any of you throw up in my car, I'm leaving you there," he laughed as we pulled into the gravel lot. "Noted," I muttered, forcing a smile, but even then there was this quiet gnawing in my stomach. Something didn't feel right, but I shrugged it off. Just pre-party jitters, maybe. But almost the moment we walked in, something felt off. The place was packed, but not loud like you'd expect. There was energy, sure, but it was strange. People weren't acting drunk, not in the usual way. Their movements felt slightly off, like they were half a second too slow. And their stares, they lingered. Too long, too blank. One man in particular caught my attention, a guy sitting alone in a shadowed booth near the back. He watched us the moment we walked in. I could feel his gaze on my skin, sharp and deliberate. He leaned in close to the bartender, said something I couldn't hear, and then vanished through a door marked VIP. Sana stepped closer to me, her voice low. "This place feels wrong." "It's just the vibe," I said, trying to sound casual. But even I didn't believe it. Mira and Aisha were already out on the dance floor, letting the beat pull them under. Rohan and Karan had gone to get drinks, leaving Sana and me to hover near the wall. I stayed close to her, my eyes scanning the room. Something kept tightening in my chest like a warning I couldn't shake. That's when I saw her. A woman, standing still near the edge of the dance floor. She wasn't dancing. She wasn't even swaying. She just stood there, perfectly still, staring. Her skin was chalky white, almost gray under the red lights. Her eyes were sunken, dark pits in her face. And then, as if she knew I was watching her, she smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was slow, off. A curl of lips that didn't reach her eyes. My skin prickled. "Hey, want a drink?" Karan's voice cut in beside me. I turned, startled. He was grinning, holding out a glass with some fluorescent-looking cocktail inside. I shook my head. "I'm good." "You sure? Bartender said it was special, made just for us." He laughed and took a sip. Something twisted in my gut. "Wait, who's us?" He shrugged. "Some girl at the bar. Said it was on the house." Sana, who'd been quiet until now, suddenly tensed beside me. "Did you see her pour it?" Karan blinked. "No. Why?" I snatched the glass from his hand and took a sniff. Nothing unusual. Citrusy, maybe a little too sweet, but that didn't mean anything. The fact that some random woman was handing out free drinks at a club in the middle of nowhere, that didn't sit right with me. I leaned in to Sana. "Don't drink anything you didn't see poured," I murmured. Just then, Mira stumbled off the dance floor. Her face was pale, like she'd seen a ghost. "Hey, I don't feel so good," she muttered. Karan caught her just before she collapsed. I thought Mira was just drunk, too many shots too fast. But then her body started to convulse. "Call an ambulance," I shouted, panic slicing through my voice. But the music was deafening, a wall of noise that swallowed my words whole. Aisha, who'd been dancing with her, suddenly stopped, clutching her head like something was drilling through her skull. My heart leapt into my throat. "Rohan!" I yelled, twisting around, scanning the crowd for my brother. But he was gone. So was the pale woman. Everything started unraveling. We somehow got Mira to a couch near the wall, but her breaths were shallow, lips tinged blue. I tried dialing 999. Nothing. No signal. The call wouldn't even connect. I looked at Sana. "Find someone. Anyone. Staff, security, I don't care." She bolted toward the front. A minute later she returned, her face drained of color. "There's no one," she whispered, barely able to get the words out. "No bartender, no bouncers. The whole front desk is empty." "What?" I stared at her. "That's not possible." "I'm telling you, they're gone." And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. The crowd had thinned. The dance floor, once packed shoulder to shoulder, now had wide gaps. The booths were nearly empty, and the ones who were left were watching us. Not moving, just watching. Then, without warning, the lights went out. Total darkness. Sana grabbed my arm, her grip vice-tight. "We need to leave, now." But before we could take a step, we heard them. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, deliberate, drawing closer. I fumbled for my phone, flicking on the flashlight. The beam cut through the black, catching on something that made my stomach turn. Karan was still holding Mira, but she'd gone still. Her eyes were wide, glassy, unfocused, staring straight ahead at nothing. Behind them, in the edges of the light, I saw shapes, figures, standing in the shadows. Dozens of them, unmoving, watching. "Go!" I barked, adrenaline surging. I snatched Rohan's car keys from the table and grabbed Sana's hand, yanking her toward the exit. Karan tried to lift Mira, but she was limp, almost dead weight. Aisha was sobbing, her breaths coming in panicked gasps. We didn't think. We just ran. The second we burst through the club doors, freezing air slapped us in the face. The parking lot was empty. Dead quiet. Rohan's car was gone. But something else hit me even harder. The club sign, Nocturne, was missing. The glowing letters that had once lit up the night were gone. The entire building looked abandoned. The glass windows were broken. The neon lights, the music, the crowd, all of it had vanished. Sana clutched my arm. "This isn't real. This can't be real." And then we heard it. Gunshots. 2 sharp cracks echoed through the silence. I whipped around toward the sound, my stomach hollowing. Karan, Mira, Aisha, gone. Just gone. Sana and I were alone. I sprinted back toward the club, screaming their names, but the doors were sealed shut. I pounded on them, kicked them, but there was nothing. No sound inside, no light, like the place had never been open at all. We stumbled back to the road, blind with panic, and flagged down the first set of headlights we saw. A trucker in his 60s pulled over, rolling down the window with a frown. "There's no club out there," he said after hearing our frantic explanation. "That place burned down, must be 10 years ago now." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. I wanted to argue, to scream, to shake him, but Sana just clung to me, trembling. We went to the police. We told them everything. They searched the area. Nothing. No sign of Karan. No Mira. No Aisha. No Rohan. No footprints. No tire tracks. No evidence anyone had been there at all. It's been years. We never found them. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I still hear the bass thumping beneath my skin. I still see that pale woman at the edge of the dance floor, smiling at me from the dark. I don't go out at night anymore. And I never, ever take drinks from strangers. I've never been the kind of person who enjoys parties. Too loud, too crowded, too chaotic. But somehow that night I ended up at one. And if I'd known what was coming, I would have stayed far away from that club. Let me back up. I was 14 at the time, but everyone always assumed I was older. Taller than most kids, already standing at 5'9". My Uncle Jason used to laugh and say I'd outgrow him one day. He was 6'4", broad as a barn, and built like a linebacker, with that kind of commanding presence that made people go quiet when he started talking. He owned a pool and spa maintenance business and catered to a wealthy clientele. One of them, a woman named Vanessa, invited him to a Halloween party at an exclusive downtown club. She told him to bring his family. Jason loved Halloween. It was his thing. So of course he jumped at the chance. I wasn't thrilled. I hated crowds, hated how music at clubs pounded through your bones and made your head feel like it was underwater. But I didn't want to be left behind either. Jason sweetened the deal. He said we'd be setting up a horror-themed section in the VIP lounge, a mini haunted house for the guests. That actually sounded fun. So I said yes. The club was in one of those high-end parts of the city where every building had tinted windows and people wore sunglasses indoors. At the entrance, 2 bouncers stood like statues by the velvet ropes, scanning the line of guests like they were guarding a vault. As we walked in, the air hit me. This overwhelming mix of alcohol, sweat, smoke, and expensive cologne. The bass from the music thudded so hard I could feel it in my chest. Red and purple neon lights flickered across the walls, casting this eerie glow that made everything feel unreal, like we were inside a dream or a nightmare. Jason and I got to work in the lounge. The plan was simple. Guests would walk through a series of darkened hallways and creepy setups before reaching the VIP section. Jason had brought his full Michael Myers getup, mask, overalls, everything, and even a real chainsaw. He'd taken the chain off for safety, but it still roared loud enough to make people scream. I dressed in this Victorian-style dress, tattered and soaked in fake blood. My makeup made it look like I'd been hanged, with a rope mark around my neck and pale ghostly skin. My role was simple. Stand completely still in the corner of one hallway and stare at people as they passed. Silent. Unmoving. Creepy. At first it was fun. The guests loved it. They screamed, they laughed, they ran. Some of them were so drunk they tripped trying to escape Jason and his chainsaw. It felt like Halloween was supposed to feel playful, thrilling, spooky in a safe way. But after a couple hours, I noticed something that didn't sit right with me. There was a group of men, 5 of them, maybe late 30s or early 40s, who had been hanging around the entrance to the haunted section. At first I thought they were just waiting to go in, but they never did. They stood there drinking, watching, not laughing, not talking much, just watching. They looked like they were in their 20s, maybe early 30s, sloppy drunk, the kind of drunk that made their laughter too loud and their movements a little too loose, like their limbs had lost all coordination. But what really got under my skin was the way they kept looking at me. Not in a casual, passing glance kind of way. No, it was pointed, intentional. Their eyes kept drifting toward me like I was something on a menu. I tried brushing it off, told myself I was overthinking it, that I was just being paranoid. I wasn't. It started when one of them peeled away from the group. He was taller than the rest, with messy dark hair, and this smug, crooked grin that twisted my stomach the second I saw it. He staggered toward the haunted section, steps uneven. "Let's see what's so scary in here," he muttered, slurring his words as he passed through the entrance. I stayed in character, my head bowed slightly, eyes watching him beneath heavy lids. He walked by without saying anything, but just as he turned the corner, I heard him murmur under his breath, "Damn, that girl's hot." My blood went cold. A few seconds later, the rest of his buddies followed him in. That's when the dread settled in. I could hear them whispering, drunken laughter mixed with words that made my skin crawl. "Dude, she's young." "So what? She's tall, no one'll know." "She looks like a doll in that dress. Bet she'd look better without it." I wanted to disappear. My hands were trembling, but I kept still, hoping they'd just keep walking, just pass through like everyone else had. They didn't. One of them stepped closer to where I stood, his breath hitting me like a wall of rot-gut whiskey. "Hey, sweetheart," he slurred. "Why don't you come out here and have some fun with us?" I didn't answer. I didn't even blink. He let out a chuckle, slicking his hand through his greasy hair. "Playing hard to get, huh? I like that." I turned my head just slightly, eyes scanning the dark hallway behind him. No Jason, nowhere in sight. Then the man reached out, his fingers brushing my arm. "Don't touch me," I said sharply, stepping back. That only made them laugh louder. "Feisty one," another guy said with a smirk. The first man moved closer again, grinning like this was all a game. "Come on, don't be like that. We just want to have a good time." My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was in my throat. I knew I had to move, had to get out, but they had me boxed in. The only way out was through them. I took a breath and started forward, trying to push past when one of them grabbed my wrist. "What's the rush?" he said, smiling. That was it. I yanked my arm away, stumbling back. "Get the hell away from me," I shouted. Their smiles changed in an instant. No more jokes, no more teasing, just dark, angry eyes. "Bitch," one of them muttered, and then the first guy lunged forward, grabbing the front of my dress with both hands. "I don't like being told no," he hissed, his breath hot and sour on my face. Then, from behind us, a roar, deafening and sudden. The chainsaw. The men froze. Jason stepped out from the shadows, the massive silhouette of him in his Michael Myers costume filling the narrow hallway. The chainsaw growled in his hands, no blade but loud enough to sound real and terrifying. Even through the dim strobe lighting, I could see the fury blazing in his eyes behind the mask. "What the fuck do you think you're doing to my niece?" he said, voice low, deadly calm. The man let go of me so fast it was like he'd been burned. "Hey man, relax," he said quickly, holding up his hands. "We were just messing around." Jason took a step forward, chainsaw still rumbling, engine snarling. "Get the fuck out," he growled. The men hesitated for half a second, then scrambled backward. One of them tried to laugh it off. "No need to get all scary, man." Jason tilted his head, grip tightening on the chainsaw's handle. I said, "Get the fuck out." They didn't wait for him to say it again. They bolted, vanishing into the crowd of the club. Jason turned to me, yanked off the mask and stepped close. "Are you okay?" he asked. I couldn't speak. My body was shaking so hard I felt like I was going to collapse. He pulled me into his arms and held me close. "You're safe," he whispered. But I didn't feel safe. Not after we left the club. Not after Jason told Vanessa everything. Not even after the security guard searched for the guys and came up empty. I kept thinking about it. What would have happened if Jason hadn't been there? And worst of all, right before they ran, the first guy looked back at me, smirked, and whispered, "We'll see you later, baby." It's been 10 years, 10 long years, and I still wonder, what if they weren't just drunk? What if it was planned, and what if one day they come back? I was 20 when it happened. Young, reckless, always chasing the next thrill like it was the only thing that mattered. That night's burned into my memory like a scar. No matter how much time passes, it won't fade. It started at a club, just like any other weekend. The place was packed, strobe lights slicing through the dark, bass pounding so hard you felt it in your ribs. Bodies swayed in a hypnotic rhythm, the air thick with sweat, cheap cologne, and spilled booze. My friends and I had pre-gamed hard, downing shots in someone's cramped apartment before catching a ride to the club. I was already buzzing when I walked in. I wasn't looking for anything that night. Not a fight, not a hookup. I just wanted the high of the crowd, the music, the chaos, but then I saw her. She was exactly my type. Long blonde hair that shimmered under the neon lights, deep brown eyes with that glassy glow that made you feel like she was staring straight through you. She had this calm, dangerous confidence, like she knew the effect she had on people and didn't need to try. Her lips were painted a deep blood red, and she wore a tiny smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. I can't even remember who made the first move. Maybe I caught her eye and smiled. Or maybe she gave me that look, the one that says, "Come over here." However it happened, we ended up talking, laughing, drinking. She told me her name was Lily. "You're fun," she said, resting her hand lightly on my forearm, her nails ice cold against my skin. "We should keep this going, somewhere quieter." I hesitated, just for a second. Normally I'd check with my friends, get their read, make sure I wasn't being stupid. But the alcohol dulled everything, my judgment, my instincts. "Where?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "My place," she said with a little tilt of her head. "It's close." I should have said no. I didn't. I gave my friends a quick wave, brushing off their vague warnings and knowing smirks. We stepped outside. The cool night air hit me like a slap, but it didn't sober me. Lily called a cab, and we slid into the back seat. That's when things shifted. She wasn't smiling anymore. She leaned back into the corner of the seat, her gaze unreadable. The fun, flirty vibe had drained out of her completely. I blamed the booze for not catching it sooner, the way her fingers drummed against her thigh, the way her eyes flicked to the driver every few seconds. 15 minutes later, we pulled up outside her apartment. It was a 2-story place on a quiet street. Nothing fancy, nothing rundown. Just normal. Too normal. We went inside. That's when I smelled it. Something foul. It hit me like a wave. Rotten, wet, metallic. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was trash she hadn't taken out, or food left out too long. "You okay?" Lily asked, her voice soft, almost distant. "Yeah," I said quickly, swallowing the nausea rising in my throat. Just felt a little sick for a second. "Bathroom's down the hall," she said, flashing a small smile. I nodded and walked toward the door she'd pointed to, trying to play it cool. But the closer I got, the stronger the smell became. It wasn't just bad, it was wrong, like something that didn't belong in a home. My hand shook as I pushed open the bathroom door. At first, my brain just refused to process what I was seeing. The shower curtain was partially drawn back, just enough to reveal something, Someone slumped in the bathtub. The dim bulb overhead flickered, shadows crawling along the tiled walls. It was a man, pale, his limbs twisted unnaturally, like a broken doll someone had tossed in there and forgotten. One arm dangled over the edge of the tub. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. Blank. Gone. Blood had pooled at the bottom of the tub, mixing with water in dark swirls that reminded me of ink in a glass. His leg, his goddamn leg, was missing, severed clean above the knee. I staggered back, bile rising fast and hot in my throat. I barely made it to the sink before I threw up. My hands braced against the counter as my body convulsed. My mind screamed, "Run! Move!" But my limbs felt disconnected, frozen with shock. Then I heard it. A soft splash. Water, shifting slightly. I turned, heart slamming against my ribs. The body hadn't moved, but something else had. My eyes locked onto it. A small pocket knife, black handle, tucked into the dead man's jeans. I couldn't stay. Every cell in my body screamed, "Get out!" My fingers trembled as I reached for the knife, my breath shallow and uneven. I backed away from the tub, careful not to take my eyes off the still figure, as if he might suddenly rise. The hallway outside was too quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, this was heavy, loaded. Lily was sitting on the stairs, perfectly still, waiting. She looked up when I stepped out. Her expression hadn't changed. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said. Her voice was different now. Flat, emotionless, like she'd just flipped a switch. I clutched the pocket knife tighter. "What the hell is in your bathroom?" Her lips curled into a slow, chilling grin, one that made the hair on my arms stand on end. "I was hoping you wouldn't ask," she whispered. And then she stood. That's when I saw the blade in her hand. She moved first. Quick, too quick, like she'd done this before. A smooth, practiced lunge. I flinched back, her blade slicing through the air inches from my face. "Stop," I shouted, stumbling backward. But she didn't stop. Not for a second. I moved on instinct. The pocket knife felt too small, too light in my sweaty grip, like a toy compared to the long, gleaming blade in her hand. She came at me again, eyes locked on mine, calm, focused, terrifying. I swung wildly, caught her forearm. She gasped, a sharp intake of breath, but didn't falter. Blood welled where the blade had cut her, dripping onto the hardwood. She charged again. I kicked her, hard. She went down, crashing to the floor with a sickening thud, her knife skidding across the hallway. She screamed, a guttural, feral sound, and clutched her arm where I'd sliced her. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Upstairs. More than one. I didn't wait. I didn't want to know. My brain flipped into survival mode. I turned and ran, adrenaline shoving me forward faster than I thought possible. I don't even remember getting out the front door. One moment I was in that house, the next I was flying down the sidewalk, lungs burning, heart ready to explode. I ran 2 blocks before I finally stopped, looking over my shoulder to make sure she wasn't behind me. Then I pulled out my phone with shaking hands. The cops came fast. What they found inside wasn't just Lily. 2 more people were there, another man and a woman, both armed, both ready. And the bodies, young men, some fresh, some not. Lily wasn't some girl I met at a club. She was something else, a hunter. I didn't go home that night. I sat in a bright, sterile room at the police station, replaying everything, again and again. Every detail, every second, every sound. "You're lucky," one officer said. I just nodded. I already knew that. For weeks I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that bathtub, that man's face, the missing leg. I kept thinking, if I hadn't smelled it, if I hadn't gone to the bathroom, if I hadn't grabbed that knife, I'd be one of them. I don't go to clubs anymore, and I never leave with strangers. Because some people aren't looking for a fun night. Some people are looking for prey. I always thought traveling solo was the purest way to experience life. No safety net, no expectations, just me, my instincts, and whatever the world threw at me. Spain wasn't a planned destination. It was more like a last-minute escape, a desperate breath after everything I was running from back home started closing in. I landed in Barcelona 3 weeks ago, and the city instantly wrapped itself around me. It buzzed with energy. Ancient stone streets echoing with laughter, flamenco music drifting from balconies, and people who lived like time wasn't a burden but a backdrop. I found myself swept up in it all. Mornings were slow strolls through narrow, sun-drenched alleyways, eyes tracing the Gothic curves of old buildings. Afternoons meant espresso so strong it made my hands shake, sipped slowly in roadside cafes where no one seemed in a hurry. But the nights belonged to something else entirely. They were loud, pulsing, alive. The clubs were sanctuaries of neon and bass, places where language didn't matter and time disappeared. Bodies moved like shadows, hypnotized by music that felt like a second heartbeat. In that chaos, nothing mattered. Just now. Just the music. Tonight felt like any other. I was crashing in a low-budget hostel near La Rambla. Grimy bathrooms, paper-thin walls, but it did the job. The receptionist, Marco, had been cool since the moment I checked in. He was probably in his late 20s, tanned, with shaggy brown hair and a permanent smirk like he knew every secret the city had to offer. "Hey," I asked him as I leaned against the check-in counter. "Know any good clubs that aren't just tourist crap?" He grinned and pulled out his phone. "You want real Barcelona nightlife?" I nodded. "Something legit." He raised an eyebrow, typed something, and handed me a screen. "Nebula. Not on any tourist map. It's underground, literally. Hidden beneath an old warehouse. No signs, no flyers." "Sounds perfect," I said. "Locals only know about it," he added. Then his expression shifted, just slightly. "But don't go alone." I laughed, trying to keep it light. "Why? Creepy basement club too sketchy for solo travelers?" His smirk dropped, just for a second. "Just don't. Trust me." I should have taken that more seriously. I showed up at Nebula just before midnight. The streets around the warehouse were nearly empty, the kind of quiet that makes your skin feel too tight. The only sign of life was a distant thump of bass coming from somewhere beneath my feet. I followed the sound to a weathered red door barely visible from the sidewalk. I knocked. A moment later, a small metal slot scraped open, revealing a pair of dark, unreadable eyes. "Who sent you?" a voice asked. "Marco," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. The door unlatched. A huge man stepped aside without a word, and I slipped in. Inside, Nebula didn't feel like a club. It felt like a fever dream. The ceiling was low, hung with dim, flickering bulbs that looked like floating fireflies. The air was thick, sweat, spilled liquor, and something sharper I couldn't place, something metallic that clung to the back of my throat. At the center of the room, a DJ spun distorted electronic beats that crawled into my chest. The crowd moved like one massive, slow-breathing creature, bodies swaying, eyes closed, hypnotized. I made my way to the bar, trying not to stare too hard at the people around me. That's when I saw them. 2 girls, one blonde, one brunette, both stunning, both radiant in that effortless, dangerous way, the kind of beauty that draws you in like a flame. They laughed with their heads thrown back like they owned the entire place, like nothing could touch them. And then they saw me watching. The blonde caught my gaze, held it, and slowly smirked. Then she started walking toward me. "You're new," she said, her accent thick, something Eastern European, maybe Russian or Romanian. "First time here," I admitted, feeling suddenly out of place. "I'm Anna." she said, leaning in close enough for her perfume to fill the space between us. That's Mara. Mara raised her drink in a silent toast, eyes unreadable, before turning back to the dance floor. She moved like she belonged to the music. Nathan, I said, fumbling my words slightly. The alcohol in my system was warm now, mixing with the adrenaline, blurring the sharp edges of my thoughts. Anna's fingers brushed against mine. You should come sit with us. I hesitated. Marco's voice echoed in my head. Don't go alone. But I wasn't alone anymore. Not technically. We walked toward a roped-off VIP section in the back. It was elevated, slightly more secluded. The lights were dimmer here, casting slow shadows. Anna poured shots of something clear into tiny glasses. It smelled like ethanol. To new friends, she said, holding hers up. To new friends, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. It burned, going down, sharp enough to make me cough. The night started to unravel. Laughter, movement, colors blurring into each other. Mira didn't talk much, barely at all, really. But Anna filled the space between us, asking question after question. Where was I from? What brought me here? What was I running from? Why did you leave home? She asked, resting her chin on her hand, her gaze unflinching. I hesitated. Just needed a break. From what? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached for another shot and swallowed it down like it could dissolve the truth. The truth was her. Sophie, my ex. I met Sophie in college. She was the kind of girl who made you feel like life had a plot again, like it was going somewhere, like maybe forever was real. But I ruined that. One drunken night, one meaningless mistake with a girl whose name I never remembered. Sophie found out, and she didn't scream or cry. She got quiet, cold. Then the messages started. Unknown numbers. You ruined my life. Notes slid under my dorm door. I see you. The final text came the night before my flight. You can run, but you can't hide. I told myself she was just angry, that she'd get over it. But deep down I knew Sophie wasn't the kind of person who let go. The music slowed. Or maybe it was just in my head. The air thickened like syrup. My arms felt wrong, too light, too heavy. A strange tingling began to creep through my limbs. I blinked hard. Anna tilted her head, smiling. Feeling good? My heart raced. Too fast. Something was wrong. My mouth wouldn't form the words, my tongue felt like clay. What was in that drink? I managed to slur. Mara turned from the dance floor, her voice flat, emotionless. Relax. I tried to stand. Nothing happened. My legs didn't respond. Panic surged in my chest. Anna leaned in, her breath warm against my ear. Time to go. Then, blackness. I woke to cold, painful, concrete cold, dim, flickering lights overhead. My arms and legs wouldn't move, bound tightly. A metallic taste filled my mouth. It was a warehouse, empty, silent, except footsteps. I lifted my head slowly, and my stomach turned inside out. Sophie. She stood in front of me, arms crossed, a slow, satisfied smile curling on her lips. Told you, she whispered. You can run, but you can't hide. My breathing turned ragged. Sophie, please. She crouched in front of me, reached out, and ran a single finger down my cheek. You hurt me, she murmured. And I've been waiting for this. A heavy metal door groaned open. 2 men walked in, each carrying one side of a large metal box. Fog spilled from it, snaking across the floor, icing the air. My throat clenched. A whimper slipped out. Sophie leaned close, her eyes wild with pleasure. You know what's inside? I shook my head, trembling. She grinned. Liquid nitrogen. No, please, I gasped. She stepped back. Time to learn what real pain feels like. The men grabbed me, cold, rough hands on my arms, and dragged me toward the box. I screamed. It didn't echo. The warehouse swallowed every sound. And then, nothing. I must have blacked out. I woke up under 2 bright lights, the smell of antiseptic, the weight of warm blankets, beeping machines, a hospital. Marco sat beside me, his face pale and drawn. "You're lucky," he said softly. "You sent me your location before you blacked out." "I did?" My voice cracked. I didn't remember anything past that last drink. "They found you in an abandoned factory outside the city, barely breathing." "What about the girls? Sophie?" I asked, voice shaking. "No sign of them," he said. "Nothing. It was like they vanished." A cold shiver rolled down my spine. She'd planned everything, waited, hunted, trapped me. And she was still out there, watching, waiting. And someday, sooner or later, she'd come for me again.